Okay, so just a couple of things. On the board, I have first and third review for test. I'm going to give you what we're doing on Wednesday, just because I know tomorrow, and my classes are all mixed, that's why I'm saying this. So tomorrow you have like that 2-hour study hall, which some of you are doing ISAT, some of you are in study hall, and then you actually go to second period. Thank you. To be working on things as well. So you're going to be like in second period, unless you're taking ISATs, right? Because you guys are taking ISATs tomorrow, right? And then the following day, some of you are going to be taking the SATs. Okay, so there's going to be some time in between there that, you know, they're going to tell you you need to quietly be working on something else. I'm just making sure that you're caught up, okay? Because we will have the test on Thursday, okay? So I'm going to give it to you now, because really after I review real quick, and I mean this is quick, this is not notes because you did that last Thursday, what was on your notes, you shouldn't have to write anything down. I just kind of want you watching me. If you already have the answers on your paper, just to explain it again. Then you can, if you finish today's, try it, you can start on the review because you know it all, okay? Because we've already gone over all of it. If not, tomorrow after you're done with ISATs, okay? Or on one of your SATs on that next day if you're not one of those that are in a 2-hour study hall, okay? Would that be fun? Whoever you have second period. Okay. And feel free to come in, and if you get stuck on the review, to come see me. What did I do? Oh, I had a stack of them. Oh, okay. So this we will grade Thursday before the test. Okay, this is not today's assignment. So just tuck them away in a special place. Okay, so if you lose this in the meantime, okay, before we grade it on Thursday before the test, where can you find this? On the calendar, okay? So make a note card if you need to. And you want to start going through these, especially with this section, because this section kind of lumps everything in together. This is a pretty good review in itself before you actually do the review. Okay, so real super duper fast. Again, I'm not going to write everything that was written out already on Thursday because you already have the answers. I'm just talking about where it came from, okay? So pretty much this whole section is solving for the variable to get the variable by itself, okay? And before, when we were solving, we said we couldn't solve it if you had a square root of a negative on the inside, because we hadn't learned about imaginary numbers yet, okay? Well, now we know what we do to replace it to show that it's imaginary by using what letter? I, okay? So now we can actually simplify this down with the I in the answer. Some of these will simplify down where there isn't an I because it's an actual perfect square, okay? Which you have examples of that. So really all we're doing in this section to get the x by itself, once we whittle it down to where there's an x squared, we know that we can take the square root of something to get rid of it, right? And what we do to one side, we've got to do to the other side. Okay, so the square gets rid of the square root. So now that we're actually solving it, when we go to write our answer on all of these, you'll notice on the board it says out of 32, there's not 32 problems, okay? There's only going to be half of that, okay? Because all of your answers are going to be worth 2 points, because if you take the square root of it, it could be a positive or it could be a negative. So every single one of your answers should have a plus and a minus in it, okay? So because I could have 2 negatives and wind up with a positive, or 2 positives and wind up with a positive, other than the ones that are going to have the i's. So just make sure you have a plus and a minus on all of those. It's like a new just added thing to what we've already learned. Okay, so the first one, and again, you already have this on your notes. To solve for x squared, we moved the 49 to the other side, which changed it from a positive to a negative. Okay, so then we have x squared equals a negative 49. Okay, so to get the x squared by itself, we took the square root, took the square root, squared, gets rid of the square root. The x is not by itself, but now we're to the previous section. That if we have a negative, it means it comes out as a I, okay? And then we just, on the previous slide that I just had up here, we just said all of these are going to be worth 2 points because all of these should have a plus and a minus. So that's the next thing we add onto there. And then we just break down the number. Well, this one happens to be a perfect square, which is 7. Okay? And we're done. Okay? So you're adding the plus and the minus to it. Okay? Because we're taking out the I, and it could be a -7 times a -7, which gives us a positive 49. Or a 7 times 7, which gives us a 49. Okay? All right. So same thing on this one. This one just happened to not be a perfect square. Okay? So we would move the 18 over to the other side. Okay? It comes to a positive, square root. This time it doesn't have an I, right? Because you don't have a negative in here. So we're still going to have the plus and the minus. And then you're breaking down 18. And again, you could do 6 and 3 or 2 and 9. You're still going to get your same answer in the end. You're looking for pairs. And I believe on the notes I did 2 and 9. Okay, and we would break down 9, which is 3 and 3. So I have a pair of 3s that come out. So it's a positive and a negative 3. And then the rad 2 is left. Okay, when we go to do the Google Forms, they're going to have the answer written out separate. They're going to have a positive 3 rad 2 and a negative 3 rad 2. We don't have to waste time doing that because it's the same number. It's just one's a positive, one's a negative. So you don't have to write them twice. Just make sure that you have the plus and the minus because that's where the 2 points come from versus you having to write it separate. Okay? All right, so there was that one. And then we had one that had an extra step. Okay, so we would still move the 48 over, just like the previous one, but now I've got to get rid of that 7. So when it's 7 times x squared, the opposite of that would be to what? Divide. Okay, so we move the 48 over and then divide by 7. So in your notes, you have all the steps written out. Okay, we have a negative 48 over 7. Okay, now when you do the square root, it's to this one and that one. Okay, so the square gets rid of the square root, but you have to take the square root of that one and the square root of that one. So now besides just that top part being similar to the previous ones, you have to rationalize the denominator and get rid of the radical. So to do that, remember we multiply the top and the bottom by rad 7 after we've simplified it down. Okay? So the negative's coming out, which is going to give me an I, but then I also have from this section the plus and the minus. Okay? If I break down 48, I can go 6 and 8, 2 and 3, 8 would be 2 and 4, and then 2 and 2. So I have a pair of 2s, another pair of 2s. So that means that 4 is coming out. Sorry. And then the 3 was left. Okay. But now I have this rad 7 that I got to get rid of. Okay. So when I multiply by rad 7 and multiply by rad 7, on the bottom that's going to be 49. The square root of 49 is 7. Okay. So that comes out. And then all you're going to do from there is just multiply those two together. Okay, the radical of the radical. So on top, which you already have it in your notes, it was a positive and a negative for I rad 21, because there's no pairs between that 3 and that 7. Okay, so that just had an extra step because of the denominator and divided by 7. Okay, so this one, I'm not going to do this one because you already have this one in your notes, same thing. So you would move the 12 over, okay, and then you would divide by 5 and then rationalize the denominator by multiplying by the rad 5. Okay, so that was the same as that previous one. Okay, this one actually simplifies down where there's no square root because we have perfect squares this time. Okay, so getting rid of the square, we would take the square root because everything in that parentheses is that, right? Then I take the square root of the other side. The only thing that don't forget, when we take the square root of this side, we have that positive and that negative is there. Okay, that would be the only thing. Just make sure you've got a positive negative after you do this side. Okay, so this gets rid of this, which leaves 4x minus 2. Okay, but the square root of 1 is what? 1, right? 1 times 1 is 1, so it's a perfect square. So now when we solve these, we're solving it separate. So you're going to have a 4x minus 2 equals a positive 1, okay? And then you have a 4x minus 2 equals a negative 1. So no more square roots, no more i's. We're going to have 2 actual numbers with no radicals, okay? So you would move the 2 over to the other side, so that would be 4x equals 3, and then we divide by 4, divide by 4. So that was one of our answers, okay? Then same thing on here, solve for x, we would add the 2 over to the other side, so then we'd have 4x equals 1, divide divide by 4, and that's my second answer. So these guys actually were two different answers, okay? Which gets you to your 2 points versus the other ones where they're the same, they just had a plus and a minus in front of it, okay? And then this one was the same one, okay? Moving it over, one with a plus, because you're going to take square root of 4. So you're going to have a positive and a negative, what? What's the square root of 4? 2. So it's the same as the last one. So you'll do it with a plus 2, and then you'll do it with a minus 2. Okay, and then the last one, this one had an extra step to it, okay? So you're moving the 112 over, which that part's not, okay, so it's going to be a negative 112. But then we've got to get rid of this 4 before we get rid of the radical, okay? So we're going to, this is 4 times because we distribute it, so it's divide. So when I divide on this side to get rid of it, I've also got to divide it on that side. So we still wind up with a negative number that we're going to end up taking the square root of. Okay, so that means you'll have a I in the problem. Okay, so we took the square root of that, that goes away, which is x plus 5. Okay, we're going to have a positive and a negative on these, on all of these. Okay, but then because there's a negative, the I is going to come out, and then you broke down 28. And I believe in the notes I did 4 and 7. Which you should have in your notes, right? And then 2 and 2. So I had a pair of 2s that came out. Okay, and then 7 was left over. So now the only difference between this one and the previous ones is that when I move this over to the other side, I cannot combine it with the 2i rad 7 because we're adding now, adding and subtracting, and they have to be like terms. So the only thing that you're doing when you move this over is just writing it in front of it. Okay, switching the signs of it. So it's x equals a negative 5. It moves over to be a negative, but I can't combine it with that. I just leave it like this. Okay, because I can't combine that with that. So that's fine. Because they're not like terms. Okay, that's probably the hardest one. Okay. Just because there's an extra step out in front. Okay, we good? Okay, so you're going to work on the try it. Only 16 problems. Okay, so work on it together. Make sure you've got 2 answers. And if it's not different, if they're the same, just make sure you have the plus and the minus in front of it. Otherwise, you'll get 1 point. Okay. Work on it together or by yourself and then compare. If you get done, I want you to hand it in. Okay. If you get done, chip away at the review if you want. If not, we've got next 3 days. If you're going to be gone. On that. Say, right? You guys are sick. Yeah. I'll see you tomorrow, but yeah, we should go class, but you'll have less quiz. No.